Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Hope everyone had a great New Year's, and to start off, we have yet another giveaway announcement. Can you believe it? This time, I'll be giving away 5 of these Larry Elder Show mugs, and you know you want one. Who wouldn't want to have one of these things? So make sure you go to winlarry.com right now, enter the giveaway. I'll be announcing the winners this month, January 20th, live on the Larry Elder Show on Epic TV, so be sure not to miss it. Again, that's winlarry.com. Got that? Capiche? Of course you do. And of course, thank you to everybody who signed up for the last giveaway. We love engaging you guys, so please let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Now, let's go to today's show, shall we? China, to combat COVID, imposed a zero-tolerance policy.
In the Chinese capital, Beijing, a tough new clampdown has just begun to combat a drastic rise in cases.
Thousands are in quarantines, enforced by teams of workers in hazmat suits.
This is the central business district, and its usually bustling streets are almost empty. Lockdowns and work from home orders have once again stifled the financial heart of Beijing. We've lost count of how many waves of this there have been, and it looks like there will be more to come.
But there were widespread protests.
These factory workers acted on an anger shared across China right now, smashing up COVID test booths and protesting pay and quarantine conditions. They were promised more money for staying in isolation while working on the iPhone production line in Zhengzhou. Protests, large and small, have grown in recent weeks as COVID cases have soared and lockdowns have intensified. When enforcing a policy is put above all else, young women can be tied up and humiliated for not wearing a mask. It is little wonder that emigration has become one of the most searched topics online. Young people who see no hope for their future, and the rich who fear their wealth is under threat from the Communist Party.
But then China suddenly announced it was changing its policy.
Now, if China is finally easing some COVID restrictions, does that mean that the protest worked? I mean, is that a victory for demonstrators?
Yeah, Anderson, I think it's fair to call it this tentative partial victory because it is remarkable to see that in authoritarian China, protests appear to have forced the Communist Party to essentially change its tune on zero COVID. It's clear that it made the government realize zero COVID is not possible or sustainable, and it's even a threat to social stability. It's now been more than a year since Omicron was first detected, but only now, Anderson, finally is state media citing months-old research and publishing stories that Omicron is less deadly. This is a huge shift in China because before this, authorities were demonizing COVID and in some cases even censoring scientifically accepted information. But the loosening of restrictions here, they are happening in a patchwork across the country. Some places are easing rules, others are still clinging on to zero COVID. And you have some people in China celebrating the change, but others, they're still frustrated and angry because all of this has been a wake-up call that the government can take away your freedom at any point and overturn your life.
So did this totalitarian regime actually listen to the people? Meanwhile, House Republicans have launched a subcommittee to investigate COVID origins. Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Galen McCullough, a patriot, a facial practice surgeon from Gulf Shores, Alabama, my mom's home state, author of 23 books. Latest ones are Tomorrow in America, The Battle for the Souls of Our Children, and When Patriots Rally, America's Greatest Weapon Against Its Enemies, Foreign and Domestic. He also played football for Alabama under Coach Bear Bryant and wrote a book about him called The Long Shadow. Doctor, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Larry, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be on your show. I've been an admirer of yours for many, many years, and I'm really honored to be here.
Well, Doctor, I appreciate that. Now, you know I got to talk to you before we turn to COVID about this game yesterday. What happened? What happened to TCU? TCU beat Michigan, my alma mater, and Georgia barely beat Ohio State. This was a slaughter. What happened?
Well, it just shows you what a group of 18 and 22-year-old kids can do on any given day.
Right.
You never know what they're going to do when they show up. And I always laugh when the prognosticators predict the outcome of football games. Because if you've played and if you've been there, followed it for a long, long time, you cannot predict what's going to happen. And Georgia hit on all cylinders. I think TCU got behind very early. I don't think they were prepared for some of the Georgia defense. And I think Georgia was fully prepared for the TCU defense and offense. A lot of preparation, and it's really sad. And I think the big loser in the whole process, in the whole game, was the CFP, the College Football Playoff, who tried to manipulate the players or the teams that were in the playoff. And
Right.
instead of getting the best team, I think they were trying to get representation from across the country. But it was sad. As a matter of fact, I really couldn't watch the second half, and I turned it off and went to one of my favorite shows, Friday Night Lights.
Doctor, I saw your interview about your book, The Long Shadow, and you talked about a defeat and what you took away from that defeat and what Coach Bear Bryant taught you about that defeat. What are these kids at TCU going to take away from that slaughter the rest of their lives? How do you deal with it? How do you come back with that psychologically?
It's very, very difficult, and I think a lot of it has to do with what the coach said at the end of the game in the dressing room. And we may never know what he said to those kids, but I know that what my coach said to me, Coach Bryant said to my teammates and I, has stuck in my mind. And I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that play. It's carried me through the rest of my life, and the lesson there was leave no room for doubt. Because
Right.
you have to go above and beyond and leave no room for doubt. And unfortunately, in the TCU game, I really don't know what you could take away from there that was a positive, except one thing. And there's one statement that I think these young men from TCU should take away. Do not let the outcome of one football game define who you are. Remember the games you won, remember the effort you put in, and remember what you're going to take away from participating in college football at a high level. And do not let that game define who you are for the rest of your life.
That's good stuff. Now let's turn to COVID, Doctor. Were you ever in favor of the lockdowns?
No, I was one of the doctors that was opposed to many of the lockdowns and the restrictions and not allowing physicians to prescribe certain medications and pharmacies to fill those prescriptions. I was a fan of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine very early on. We had what we call the COVID cocktail. And although I'm a facial plastic surgeon, I treated my patients and I treated my staff and I treated my family. And I can tell you that of all the people that we started on the COVID cocktail very early on, not a single one was ever hospitalized. And I have a good friend who treated 400 patients in the Black Belt part of Alabama, where the high majority, our large percentage of the patients there have all three comorbidities. And not a single one of his patients were hospitalized by using hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and the other parts of the cocktail, steroids and other things.
Right.
So I just think that the whole COVID thing was the greatest travesty that's ever happened to our country. And so many people died that did not have to die because of restrictions that were put on physicians to be able to prescribe medications.
And Doctor, as we've learned from the Twitter files, the point of view that you just expressed was not widely disseminated. It was suppressed. People that signed the Great Barrington Declaration, the signers before they signed it, were respected epidemiologists. Then after that, they were quacks. It is outrageous what Twitter did to suppress the debate on whether or not we should have had a lockdown, the debate on whether or not mask mandates and vaccine mandates made any sense.
And many of these doctors were demonized. Some lost their jobs and lost their licenses because they were accused of disseminating false information. And they were not. They were utilizing the training that we all received in medical school and applying that training to the conditions that we were seeing in our offices. And I think that was the problem. Anytime government gets involved in treating people at the local level, you're never going to get the outcomes that you want. And so that's what's happening, I think, in China. The government has been running everything over there for a long, long time. And the dystopian Orwellian society that they've created in China and that other countries have created, people just can only tolerate that for so long. And eventually they will rise up. And I think the Chinese people are rising up finally.
Doctor, what, in your opinion, is the origin of the COVID virus?
One of the laboratories in China. I think it was weaponized. I think the virus was weaponized and to be a biological warfare weapon. That's my belief. And it's been pretty successful when you think about what has happened with that virus and all of the things, the shutdowns and the sanctions and the vaccines that aren't vaccines. It's just amazing how many of our freedoms were tested during the COVID pandemic, or what I call plandemic, in America. And there's so many people that died that did not have to die, simply because of restrictions on our doctors' ability to prescribe for them and treat them as we were taught.
Doctor, is it your view that it leaked from a lab accidentally, or do you think it was released on purpose?
Well, if you look at the long history of China and the long history of communism in general, they're very open about what their objective is, and that is to control the world. And to control the world, they have to do some very drastic things. And they're threatening nuclear warfare, and biological warfare it's another one of those things. And I believe that this was a biological weapon that has been released, and they don't really care if they lose several millions of people in China. Their population is so great that I wouldn't put it past them to do that as part of genocide. And they certainly have not tried to do things that would prevent it other than the shutdown. And we know now that there are things far beyond just keeping people at home that are effective, and there's no herd immunity that is developing when you shut people down. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing as well as we are in America today, is because we didn't totally shut everything down, and we do have some herd immunity as a result of that.
Doctor, as you know, I ran for governor in California, didn't win, but during that time I was interviewed by CNN, and I was asked about vaccine mandates, and I said young people are not likely to get sick if they're healthy, not likely to get really sick, not likely to be hospitalized, and certainly not likely to die, and therefore I opposed mask mandates, vaccine mandates, and lockdowns. And I was called anti-vax, even though I was double vaxxed because I've got some comorbidities. My doctor advised me to do it, but I was called anti-vax. And then they quoted the CDC saying that Larry Elder was wrong. Well, fast forward now, even the World Health Organization now is saying that that lockdowns are not effective.
No, they're not effective. And the sad thing is these vaccines that are not vaccines, they changed the definition of vaccine, as you know, in order to call them vaccines. And there's so many things that are occurring. The side effects of those vaccines are the spike protein. And Dr. Robert Malone, who is a man that I have tremendous respect for, who actually was the inventor or the originator of the mRNA process that they used in the vaccines, advised against using that process for the vaccines very early in the game. He advised against it and told us that the vaccines would become less effective as time went on, and that the complications were going to increase as a result of what those vaccines did to change our immune system and other systems within our body. And I think we're witnessing that today.
And doctor, that was the last thing I wanted to ask you about. There are reports that young athletes are having cardiac issues.
Yes.
In great numbers, people who have been vaccinated. Do you think there's a connection between some of these young athletes dying and them having been their having been vaccinated?
Well, there's really no other way to connect it, Larry, because it hasn't happened in the past. And it started happening when we started vaccinating young people, and they're dying of myocarditis. Myocarditis is an inflammatory process of the cardiac muscle. And then as that muscle is inflamed and irritated, it causes arrhythmias, irregular heartbeat. And I'm not too sure that didn't have an impact on the player that went down a week or so ago on the field. So I think that, yes, we're seeing a lot of deaths and a lot of other things in terms of reproduction, the decrease in sperm count in men who've been vaccinated. And I could go on and on and on and on. And I just believe that as time goes by, we're going to learn that we really have been duped, that the American people have been duped, and people over the world. And some countries didn't really follow the mandates that were put upon us. There are parts of India who started using an area of India that's about the size of the United States of America, started using ivermectin very early. And if you go back and look at the data, they almost no deaths from COVID. So it's a matter of connecting all the dots. And our media, the mainstream media, so-called, or legacy media, has just fallen right in along with the messages coming out of the bureaucrats in Washington, and not allowed us to connect all those dots. But there are a few of us like yourself and myself and Dr. Peter McCullough, who I have tremendous respect, and Robert Malone and Dr. Pierre. I have some tremendous respect for those colleagues who've been out there on the front line and saying things, and they've been demonized and chastised. But I think history will show that they were pioneers and they were ahead of their time, and they should be held up and looked upon as heroes trying to win a battle.
Doctor, are you related to Peter McCullough?
No, I'm not. He spells his name McCull, and my name is Oll. So our families might have been related somewhere back over in Scotland or Ireland. But no, I don't know him. Right. But I've followed him, and he seems to be a brilliant man, and I just have tremendous respect for him.
Dr. Galen McCullough, thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. When we come back, a Virginia 6-year-old brings a gun to his school and shoots his teacher. And Professor John Lott testified before Congress about the negative unintended consequences of gun control laws. Now, be sure to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and scroll down, and you'll see the little notice below and get on our mailing list. Why? Because, believe it or not, for some reason, don't know why, YouTube from time to time has a problem with our videos. To make sure you don't miss any of the videos, get on our mailing list. Also, there's a donate button. You can always hit that and throw a little something in the tip jar to make sure you still get hard-hitting content coming at you that you can't get anywhere else. LarryWithEpic.com. That's LarryWithEpic.com.